what we should do, glorify God. We know what it is to display the infinite value of God in our life. But how do we accomplish it? How do I, in the morning, when I get out of bed, go to work, how can I live a life that glorifies God? I mean, is this something I conjure up in my own strength? Is it something that I have to produce on my own? How does it happen? Well, Matthew chapter 5, verse 13 through 16 tells us exactly how we can practically and powerfully glorify God on a daily basis in the way that we live. You see, if we want to fulfill our chief end to glorify God and to fulfill our purpose in life, Jesus says there's two things you must be. You must be salt in verse 13, and you must be light in verse 14. Because what happens when God's people are salt and light? Verse 16 tells us that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. You see, do you want to live a life that the world around you, that the co-workers around you, that your spouse, that your children, that your parents, that those around you, when they look at your life, they will see a life that says, God is everything to me, and therefore they'll even glorify God out of that? Well, you can if you will follow what Jesus teaches in Matthew 5, 13 through 16. Now, what should I learn? How can I do this? Well, as I look at these verses, I pulled out just 3 points that I want to make this morning from this passage. And I promise you 3 points that if you will do this, you can live a life through the power of the Holy Spirit that will glorify God as you live. And here's the first thing. It seems rather simple and elementary, but it is foundational and it is fundamental. And here's what it is. Number one, you need to know who you are. Know who you are. You notice verse 13 and verse 14 begins with the same word. You, ye. He's speaking to a group of people, and he goes the step further, and the next word is, he says, ye are. Ye are. He is speaking about something that we are. Now, let's just step back for a minute, and let's remember the context of Jesus' words. He's preaching the Sermon on the Mount. He's just finished the introduction with the Beatitudes. We spent 8 separate weeks on the Beatitudes. And the next breath out of Jesus' mouth is this. Ye are the salt of the earth. Ye are the light of the world. Who's the ye that he's focusing on in verse 13 and verse 14? The ye in verse 13 and 14 is the blessed man of the Beatitudes, backing up in verse 3 through verse number 12. The blessed person, the salt and the light, is the person who realizes their spiritual poverty, who mourns because of their spiritual poverty, who becomes humble before God, and then who hungers and thirsts after righteousness and is filled. And then they live a life that's merciful to others, that is pure in heart before others and God. They are peacemakers as they live, and they can even face persecution from the world outside of them for righteousness' sake, and they can even rejoice and be glad in it. It is this person that Jesus says is the salt of the earth and the light of the world. And here's one reason why. The blessed person of the Beatitudes is so contrary, so different than the culture and the age in which we live in. Their life causes one to step back and say, that person's different. Why is that person different? And they say they're in the kingdom of Christ. Christ is their Lord. They are saved. And therefore they'll say, boy, God really must be working in their life. And thereby God is able to get glory from their life. You see, what I love about this is this. Jesus does not tell us to become something. He does not say, become salt, become light. He does not tell us to do what salt and light do. He doesn't say, you should do this or you should do that. No, he begins at the fundamental and the foundation where we all should begin. You are something. And here's why that's so important. Because what you do springs from who you really are. What good would it do for Jesus to say, do this like salt does it, or do this what light does, when you're not salt and you're not light? Then you end up just trying to be something and do something. Number one, you're not, and number two, you cannot do. It's the same way with sinners. Why do sinners sin? Sinners, they are not sinners because they sin. They sin because they are sinners. A person is not a thief because they steal. A person steals because they're a thief. A person is not a liar because they tell a lie. A person tells lies because they're a liar. A person is not a murderer because they kill. They kill because they are a murderer. Jesus says all of these things are in you and they proceed from the heart, and therefore through our actions, through our words, through our honesty, through our integrity, through our life, what we are doing is this. We're putting on display to everyone around us who we really are. You see, there are many people who can talk well with their lips. They might know the 4 great spiritual truths. We're all sinners. Sin requires death. Jesus paid for that. We can be saved. They might be able to take you down the Romans road. They might be able to even repeat some of the catechisms. They might even be able to tell you some of the truths of the Bible as they perceive it. And they talk real good with their lips. But if you're around when church people aren't around, their life is completely different than that of what they say with their lips. Do you know what happens in that instance and in that situation is you end up losing your light, you end up losing your salt, and ultimately you end up revealing the real you. You see, people can deny what you say with your lips, but they cannot deny how you live your life. They can deny the Romans road with your lips, but when they see you day in and day out, being that blessed person of the Beatitudes, being merciful when you could be vengeful, being a peacemaker when you could be one who stirs the pot, being pure in heart when you could be a hypocrite, and actually rejoicing when somebody persecutes you for righteousness' sake rather than retaliating, it is then that they have to step back and say there must be something about having a personal relationship with God through Jesus Christ. He says you are these things. They're fundamental. And so if you want to glorify God, you must ask yourself this question: what am I? Am I salt? Am I light? Am I that blessed person of the Beatitude? Am I saved? If not, you need to be. But here's the second thing I want you to notice. Not only should you know who you are, but number 2, you need to know what to do. Because Jesus likens us to salt and to light. That teaches us the responsibility that we have as believers in the world in which we live. He says in verse 13, you're the salt of the earth. Salt in ancient times had many different uses. For instance, it was used as a preservative. They didn't have refrigeration back then, so whenever they would take meat, they would pack it in salt. And that salt would preserve that meat, and it wouldn't rot as fast. They also used salt to pay people. Roman soldiers were oftentimes paid with money, wages, and salt. In ancient times, salt was so valuable, it could be traded ounce for gold. Matter of fact, the word salary derives from the same word from which we get our word salt from. Roman soldiers were paid half in salt. Have you ever heard the statement, that boy ain't worth his salt? That's where it comes from. He's not worth what he's getting paid.